Hello and welcome to a new episode of Have We Really Met? Tonight I'm going to be interviewing a really good friend of mine named Margaret, who is one of the people that I met at college for my MFA program, which is Master of Fine Arts in Writing. Margaret and I connected over various topics, but spirituality being the biggest one. So let me introduce Margaret here in a second. Okay, if you could ask me anything you've didn't ask before or just don't know, but always kind of wondered, what would that question be?
Oh man, I have so many. The one that I thought about when you sent the questions was, when do we next get to see each other in person? Uh,
When I decide to come out East Coast again, when I don't have to teach like I said,
yeah,
when I get
right.
to own my own time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would, oh man, if I could, I would probably spend a good 6 months on the East Coast just driving up and down. Because I've been to New York City,
Yeah.
I've seen the highlights. I've seen the highlights in Boston. I've even seen the intricate things that I've had local friends show me. But I have never seen upstate New York. I've always wanted to see that. I've never seen Pennsylvania. I've always wanted to see Amish country. And I've never been to Jamestown. And I teach it, and I've never been there. And I also want to see George Washington's, plantation or whatever, just because I could say oh, George Washington lived
Yeah.
here, but all of that stuff, because whenever I got into history in the first place, the very first thematic thing in history that really just stood out to me the most were first contact. That was the biggest thing for me, because I just kept thinking as a kid, what would it have been like from both perspectives to meet this other culture, not knowing the language, not understanding the nature of one versus the other, and
Yeah.
how fearful they probably were of each other, but then it just turned into this other narrative on how that all played out. And what we know is what the victors have written, but
Right.
we don't know about those smaller stories that happened in the in between, and the things that are just now coming out of the atrocities that occurred, and all of the things that the Dutch did and the things that the French did. And it's just oh God, it wasn't just the American side of things. It was everybody was involved. But that stuff just fascinated me because of that first contact idea.
Right.
So I just kind of want to go there and see the origin stories where they actually played out. And I feel very drawn to certain areas because I feel like if I were to stand in that place and touch the earth, I would probably get to see it in real time. And that is
Yes.
probably one of the only places I've ever been where I feel like I could do that. And I've never been able to do that in anywhere. Okay, I lied. The only other place I've been able to do that was Hawaii. There are places in Hawaii that are specifically touched by spirit. And I've been in those places and exhibited things about myself that I never thought were possible, and experienced things that I never thought that possible on this realm. But I feel like if I were to go to those places, I would be able to do that exact same type of inhabiting. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think I could take a good 6 months to a year and just not care and just view it all, see it all, learn it all, taste it
I
all,
love
because
it.
I'm a huge foodie. But
Yeah. I mean, gotta
but
do
if I were
that
to,
too.
yeah, but if I were to come out and visit again to where you get to see all of this crazy in person, hopefully in the summer, because that's my hope.
Okay. Great.
But we also had decided, when we talked a couple weeks ago, we said we wanted to do Salem together.
Yes.
So maybe spring break, if I push the envelope a little bit, because 3 kids, they make it a little impossible sometimes.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think Salem together would be a hoot and a half,
Oh my
because
gosh.
I'm gonna laugh it up about the cinnamon and salt in your doorstep every single time we walk into a witchy shop and be like, ooh, do they sell the packs where the cinnamon and salt come together? Do they also sell little brooms and dust vacs together? I'm not talking shit about the witch community. I just think it's funny that they're all pushing the same narrative, but with different affirmations as they do it.
Yeah.
Just subscribe to whatever affirmation you think works best, is my only takeaway on that. Don't push it and say if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong, because you don't know. Just like as a teacher, I can't tell I cannot stand in front of my class of 35 students and say, the way I'm going to teach this is going to touch all of your brains, because that's not true.
Yeah.
What is working for one person is not going to work for their neighbor. And I have to adjust my teaching practice in order to get to their brains and engage them. So teacher talk, witch talk, spiritual talk. Just understand not everybody is a paint all ones all fits all kind of thing. So stop using the idea that if you're not doing it this way, you're doing it wrong, because that just makes people not want to listen to you.
Yeah, exactly. You want to reach people, be open-minded.
Be open-minded, of course. And like witches of all people should be the most open-minded, because I mean,
I agree.
you're dancing around a bonfire sometimes naked underneath a full moon. How much more open-minded do you need to be? That is hell, I mean, sometimes they're even wielding lightsabers while they do it. Like that's be open-minded. But anyway, okay, that's just my little
Only way
tangent.
to do it. If you're gonna go skyclad, you must have a lightsaber.
Yeah, exactly.
All
Okay, well, I'm gonna
right, my
end it
dear.
here, but it was so fun talking to you. Thank you so much for being on
Oh,
here, and I cannot wait to be a guest on yours. I'm sure we'll have more things to
yes.
share and things. And as soon as the episode comes out, I will share it out to everybody and anybody who listen. So
Oh,
thank you
thank you.
again, and thank you for the amazing friendship that you have given me over the years. It has been irreplaceable, and I never hope to ever see it go anywhere.
Likewise.
Okay, I love
Likewise.
you.
Thank
Give your
you.
mom a big hug for me.
Love you too. I will, sweetie. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Have We Really Met? Tonight, I'm going to be interviewing a really good friend of mine named Margaret, who is one of the people that I met at college for my MFA program, which is Master of Fine Arts in Writing. Margaret and I connected over various topics, but spirituality being the biggest one. So let me introduce Margaret here in a second. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm awesome. Thank you for uh
Good.
thank you for deciding to be on this podcast with me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. I mean, I love talking to you regardless of the reason. So,
Right. Yeah, we definitely have some conversations, that's for sure. So, we are already recording, so I'm just gonna go ahead and throw you into the bullpen as it were. But have we really met? Have like we really met in person?
yeah, multiple times for which I'm very grateful and fortunate.
You're just gonna have me blushing the entire time. I'm pretty sure that's what's about to happen. That's okay. But okay, so take us back. When did we meet?
We met in June 2017 at the Mountain View Grand Resort in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. It was summertime, of course, because it was June. Um, there were black flies buzzing everywhere,
Oh my
and I
gosh.
met you in the hotel lobby, right near that big fireplace.
Oh, the entry at the lobby. Oh my gosh. See,
Yeah.
okay, I remember that differently. I remember that differently. I think the first time I really felt like I met you and started a conversation with you was at one of the dinners, like the all together dinners where we were all like sitting at those big round tables. And I think to be honest, I was talking to Brenda a couple of days ago, and we had talked about that as well. Like, did we remember, where exactly everybody was? And our thing was that we had seen each other in the lobby, but we hadn't really spoken. And then at dinner one night, that's when like our worlds kind of collided, because we knew that we were there in the same cohort, but like we hadn't had a lot of interactions. And then we had a gentleman say some very off-putting things to me, and to which she jumped to my defense, and that was it. Like we were the fastest friends at that point. But okay, so
Gotcha.
you remember us meeting by the lobby fireplace.
By the lobby fireplace. And we were in a group of people. So it wasn't just us. We were in a group of people that were in our cohort. I think, I couldn't even remember who else was there because what you said to me was so memorable that everything else just kind of like fizzled away.
What'd I say?
You said you're an empath and you're not shielding and it's going to kill you one day.
I jumped right out the gate and told you that?
You did.
Man. Sometimes intuition is scary. How it just like
right?
blah,
It's like
blah.
download and coming, you're hearing this whether you want to or not.
Okay. Well, I apologize in hindsight, but not really. Sorry, not sorry.
No, but you saved me. I started shielding and, um, energy levels are good for the most part. So, I think because I was already opening myself up to a different type of spirituality, the message was not unwelcome, and I don't think that you would
Mm,
have delivered if it was unwelcome.
wow.
We hear the things that we're meant to hear when we're meant to hear them. And I think going into a new group situation that I was already nervous about, it kind of helped to hear that at the beginning, like, okay, I gotta just like it's good to get to know people, but I have to like take care of my energy a little bit.
Was that the first day of our residency
That was
together?
the
Like
first day.
oh my
That
God.
was the very first day. And I don't even think we told each other our names yet because we had the name tags.
I'm trying to I vaguely remember now that you've said that because I coming into that like group dynamic was so off-putting to me as well, just because it was just like all these brand new people, and I knew I had been the one to like travel the farthest because I was coming all the way from Hawaii, and already I was kind of out of my element because everybody seemed so introverted, and I was just not an introvert. I'm a very extroverted, hyper energy kind of person. So trying to approach people, I was just like, why is everybody so introverted? And then I think watch it might have just been one of those things where it's like I was watching you speak and I was like seeing that you were also extroverted when you were around your type of people and stuff. And then I know that I had seen our good friend Danny, and Danny was in the middle of having this very passionate conversation with somebody, and it was just like, oh, okay, this is the group. This is the group I need to be in there. And to be honest, like I remember saying that too, but I thought that was a couple days in. I didn't realize it was the very first day. So I'm a little bit like, oh man.
And no,
That
no, it was good. It was fine.
it's one of those things where you're just like, okay, I just said this thing, so I really hope that this person isn't like a religious fanatic who's going to come at me with, pitchforks
Yeah.
and torches and just be like,
Yeah.
get her out of our program.
Get the mob. No, no, I was totally on board with it. But I was just I was a little bit taken aback at first because like it felt like, when you have a really good friendship that develops over time and like your friend can just like see into every piece of you.
Hmm.
It felt
Yeah.
like that, but I just met you, at least in this life. And so it was kind of just like it felt comforting in a way, but also kind of like, what is she talking about?
I have been scarily accurate when I first meet people, and I don't even realize until like later when they come back and they're like, "Oh, you said this thing," and I'm like, "I did," and then, but I don't think I've ever had anybody come back to me and say like, "You said this thing and it really pissed me off, and you need to be careful."
Right.
Like I've never had that, so in that sense, I guess like the message is always warranted and it's always needed. And that's why I feel compelled to deliver it. But to be honest, going into that first residency, like I felt like I was completely out of my element. I didn't feel like I was a writer, but I had been chosen to be in this program. And sitting in there with all of these people who were, oh, I've published all of these books and I've published these articles. And I'm like, I wrote a piece about being in a lockdown and sent it in. And I have nothing published. I've never sent anything in. I didn't think that I was way out of my, like I said, I just was way out of my element. And I didn't think that I was going to make it to the end. Like, cause these people would know way more than I do. And even talking to Danny, how she had like self-published her books and stuff, I was just like, yeah, see, this is hmm, you know, where am I?
You totally belonged there. And I hear you. I thought there were a few moments where I was like, is this even like really a thing? Because I got there like 2 hours before everybody and they hadn't even started like giving people rooms yet. So I was just kind of like milling around for 2 hours, walking around the entire hotel grounds, wondering if like I needed to drive home. I was like, is this a thing? Like no one would confirm for me. They're like, someone will be here soon. I'm like, someone to do what?
To do all of the things that we didn't know we were actually going to like get tested on. That first residency, I feel like I stretched so many cerebral muscles, and heartstrings and everything else because I got to connect with people on such a level that I don't think a conversation would have done. So
Yeah.
not only on the sense of reading people's stories, because I was in the nonfiction line of things and hearing people write about their experiences and their traumas and their happies and their lows and all of those things, and then hearing some of the fiction pieces that were being read at our open mic nights during dinners, it was just this incredible kaleidoscope of literary element and mind and all of those things combined to create this dynamic that I don't think can be replicated anywhere else. So to be a part of
I
that
agree.
was such a privilege. And not only that, but then also having these like published authors in our groups as our mentors at the same time and getting to learn from their expertise and their genius and all. It's just, yeah, I don't think that that's something that can be replicated easily with a group that's going to be willing to be as vulnerable. And I
I
think that
agree.
was the really telling thing, was we had such a willingness to be vulnerable with each other prior to all of this crazy stuff that's happened since 2020, where everybody's just seemingly lost their damn minds. And we
Yeah.
were in this bubble of just intrinsic authenticity that was allowed to be on display for anybody and everyone to see. And the very
Yeah.
first day was difficult because I had to share a piece in my group. And I think I must have walked out looking like somebody had just like stepped over my grave about 50 times, because one of the people that was in a later cohort looked at me and said, "It looks like somebody's kicked your walls in. Are you okay?" And I just remember looking at her saying, "What walls?" And she was just, "Whatever walls you had up thinking nobody could see your real story, those walls." And I crumbled. I was like, "They did." And I didn't think that that was something that was a problem. I just thought I was writing.
Yeah.
No, your stuff is all out there. It was
All 100%. Yeah.
so
Were
what
you, so you
Oh,
had
go
to be
ahead, go
critiqued on,
ahead.
sorry, you had to be critiqued on day one?
Day one.
Oof, that's
Yeah.
tough your first semester.
Yeah, first time around, and I'm just listening to these people go after me thinking there's no way my stuff was on par with theirs. But then finding that it's not about being on par, it's about your willingness to be vulnerable and your willingness to put it out there. The critic within, is always the one that's going to be the worst. And the
It's the
people that were
worst.
sitting around that table treated it with such kid gloves when it came to the actual experience. The writing stuff, oh, they annihilated, this paragraph needs to go here and this needs to be turned into this thing, which I didn't mind because their creative process combined really did hone out that piece for me in a way that I couldn't see it on my own. So being in that place really did make me go back to my room that night and go, yeah, they're right. I'm starting over. And I'm not in a way where I'm completely starting from scratch, but starting from an element of, this is my story and this is the best way in which to tell it, because this is the way it will land the best. So that's
Yeah.
why I felt like, oh God, I'm not on par with these people, because I'm looking at the story going, yeah, this is great.
I know, I know. I think everyone in our cohort said something. We're like, this is the best thing ever. And then you get to critique and you're like, oh my gosh, what a mess this is. But that's part of the process. And I think, we were very lucky in our cohort. For 99.9% of us, we all gelled really well. And, we like you said, we were vulnerable together. And
Mhm.
I think that's rare. And you get a group of like 17, 18 strangers and like put them in a hotel for a week and they become like really open with each other and very caring for each other very quickly.
Oh yeah. No, I know there was a couple of times where there were some disagreements between people, and the defense mechanisms that kicked in, to make sure that that person that was feeling picked on or, taken out of the group in some way, they were quickly rallied around and said, "No, that's not what's happening." So it was great. It was great. And I
Yeah.
know that
Like,
there were some people in our cohort the first round like that got kicked out, because they came in with not great intentions and they were quickly ousted, not because of things that we didn't agree with, but because of their own behavior in the hotel going, we don't like this type of person in our spaces. So, and unfortunately that was the person that Brenda ended up defending me against, because we were at dinner and we were having a big conversation around the table, and this gentleman decided to sit there and very loudly say, "Has anybody ever told you you're just a little too much?" And he said it super
ooh,
loud. And Brenda instantly yelled across the table at him, "Why don't you get the F out of here? Who the fuck do you think you are?" Blah, 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 blah. And it was just coming to my defense. And I didn't realize that I had made any type of impression on her because we had all just met. And I know that there was another woman that was sitting between us, and we had been in a conversation, and I had been talking across the table at somebody else. And I think that while we were having that discussion about what caused him to say that, it was because he was intimidated by the amount of women intellect on display, and he was quiet
Yeah.
and couldn't stand the fact that he was quiet in this group full of women that were all having various exciting opportunities to converse, and he was just not invited. So he decided to invite himself in a way that was super, super toxic and got him quickly addressed in a way that he did not expect.
Well, I love Brenda.
Right?
Love her to death.
But that's the thing, right? Like all of us were in this group not knowing what to expect, not knowing what the program was going to pull out of us, not know what or how we were going to exit it as writers. So
Yeah.
going back to the beginning of all of this, what drew you to the program in the first place?
Oh, well, my father had passed the fall before we started. And a friend of mine said, I think it would be helpful to you to have something new to focus on,
Hmm.
because I was very stuck in that place and having trouble sort of just like moving through the final stages of the grieving process. And I didn't disagree with her because I had always intended to go back, and initially I was going to go for a PhD, but basically I was looking for teaching experience, hands-on teaching experience. I had gotten my first master's, applied for a lot of positions. All of them said no to like
Oh,
150 applications. So finally I emailed the HR department. I said, look, I'm not trying to argue their decision, but can you point me in the right direction? Because I'm kind of like just treading water here. And she was like, yeah, you need to go get an MFA or a PhD, because no one's going to pay you to teach until you've taught for free. And I was
yeah.
like,
Oh, I
okay,
love that caveat. Yeah.
yeah, right. And I mean, I did get paid as part of the program at our school, but it was basically my gas getting up there and back during the
Hmm.
semester, which is fine. That didn't bother me. Um, so that's why I signed up. I did not expect to find friends like you. I spoke to people and they were like, yeah, the folks you meet at residency, they're going to be like family. I'm like, how? You see them for like a month out of your life
Yeah.
over the course of 2 years.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a Capricorn, I'm an introvert. How is that going to feel like family? Like, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I went and I was like, I'm going to just have an open mind and see what happens. And it was like 2 days in, family,
Right. And
because it's stripped of everything that's like holding you back from being your true self.
right.
And so yeah, that's how I came to it. How about you?
I see, this is a funny thing. I feel like I've already told the story and I don't want to like bore everybody who's listening, but I had just finished my master's degree in history. My angle from my final thesis was how the Mormon church actually came in and capitalized on indigenous culture of Hawaii and how they still do to this day. And I wrote this like 110-page thing about it, and I got very in depth with my analysis. I interviewed a whole bunch of Native Hawaiian activists on this stuff, and they were very vocal about their position on things, which they have every right to be. I'm a very passionate person when it comes to defending the rights of others, so of course my thesis was very passionate. So my professor gets my thesis, and within 48 hours emails me and said I could not put this down. It felt like I was reading a book. And
Oh,
unfortunately, it was a very passionate book and it does not speak well of a historical analysis of events. This is more the telling of the systematic takeover of a part of an island based on religious doctrine and how it's now subjugated this entire indigenous, part of this island. The whole thing's indigenous, but whatever. So I said, okay, well, does that mean I don't graduate? Like, what is that? And she said, no, you graduate. But here's the thing. If you ever want to be published in a historical journal, you're going to have to really write like a historian. I don't think you have that in you. And that's not a bad thing. I I hope you take it as a compliment when I say, if you get super passionate about something, you definitely need to write about it, because I could not put your thesis down. Who reads a 110-page thesis in the course of a day? Well, I do. And I have also forwarded your name to the director of the MFA program. Please submit some additional writing to him so he can see it. So
Awesome.
I had been, you know, playing with the idea of writing some stuff. So I had written a couple of things in responses to events that had happened while I was in my first year of teaching. We had a lockdown scenario happen at our school that a guy was walking around with what they had said was a machete and a gun. So we were all in lockdown together, super stressful. My kids were freaking out. I'm freaking out. That's my first time ever having to deal with the lockdown situation. And am I going to get out of this alive? And are my students going to get out of this alive? So I just wrote a point by point narrative of what it's like as a teacher in a classroom having to go through this. So that I took and I submitted that to Ben Nugent, and also within 24 hours I read your piece and I couldn't put it down. Also, my secretary also put your piece on my desk for me to read it, not knowing I already had it. So therefore, two opinions, say you need to come to this program. So that's how I got in. But like I said, I had been toying with the idea of writing. I hadn't really been writing, but on the request of a former professor, I was just like, okay, then maybe I have something. So that's why I did it.
Beautiful.
It's crazy
Nice.
how things like that happen, though, where you're just like, I'm going to be a teacher for the rest of my life and be a historian. And then they're like, we've got other plans for you. Hence,
There you
podcast.
go.
Yeah, it's here. But anyway, what did you find to be like the most fundamental piece of that program that really has either helped you or kind of made you, I could have done this somewhere else, or
I thought it was going to be the teaching, but when I got into working in higher ed, and I taught there for 4 years, um and I did not enjoy it. I didn't get the same high, the natural high out of doing it. And it wasn't because of the students. I didn't like the way that the bureaucratic part of the administration worked.
Mhm.
Um, I have a very prominent placement of Uranus in my chart, and my Mars is in Aquarius. So it's not it's not a good spot for me. But so I thought it was going to be that, but it was really the connections. It was
the
our
con-
cohort largely. Yeah.
just
And
just the connections, that was like your big takeaway from all of that.
my biggest take, well, so I already gotten a master's degree in creative writing. So it's not that I didn't learn anything. I
Oh,
learned a
okay.
lot.
Okay. Got you.
Yeah, I learned lots, but I wasn't really going for that reason. And like it's not like I didn't, and I took away plenty from that, but what really stuck with me was the people I met there.
Yeah, for sure. I'm the same
Definitely.
way. I'm the same way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, friendships like my friendship with you, there's absolutely no reason except for that under the sun that we would have met. We live on different sides of the country. You were
Mhm.
in Hawaii at that point, so even further away.
Mhm.
Um, and our paths just, the fact that they crossed there. And I remember another conversation with you. We were sitting by the bonfire, and we decided either we had been friends in a previous life or whatever, but we were going to be friends for the rest of this one. And it was just such, we were talking about
Yeah.
the monkeys, we were talking about s'mores. It was like the whole thing, right? And it just yeah, it's the conversations and the people that we met that really, stuck with me the most.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So my thing is also the connections, because I have more people on my friends list because of this MFA program than I did for any other reasons. I've put coworkers on there, and then like quickly, like after I left the job, going, I don't need you on there anymore, because it's not one of those things that really works for you anymore. And it's not something that you're just like, well, I used to work with this person and now I don't, and we don't even see each other. And I didn't really like her when I was there in the first place. So a lot of those connections are just so surface level. But the connections that we
Yeah,
made in this program were so deep and defying what should be normal and logical. Because when and I'll tell you, the craziest takeaway that I had from this program is saying what I said to you on that first day of like, you're an empath and you're not shielding, I was coming into this like huge spiritual thing. And I didn't know what process it was going to take. I just knew that something was trying to break through from, within. All that's all I knew. And I had done, and I've read tarot cards since I was 13. And I remember I do remember telling you the story, but like I was at a psychic fair with my mom, and this lady just
Yeah.
made a beeline for me out of the crowd, and she's just like, you're a psychic and you need to get some tarot cards. And my mom was like, yeah, we should. I know she's psychic. And I was just like, was anybody going to tell me, And I had put it away for a very long time because my marriage was to somebody who didn't want to believe in it and only wanted to use it for when it was beneficial to him. So coming into this program, knowing that there was already this divide that was going between us, I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to let the freak flag fly, because at this point, I really need to figure out who the F I am. And if this is coming out, then I'm just going to let it. And where else better than in a group full of crazy creative people that are either going to go, that lady's crazy, or that lady's got something. Yeah. And the best part about that was it wasn't the very first residency that we had together that where this came out. It was the second one, because we were locked down for our week-long residency in the middle of January, and it got down to negative 20 degrees. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, because the pipes froze and they ran out. Then there was no water coming into the town. I remember that very well.
And we couldn't really go into town much without like risking death or dismemberment, because the roads were all icy and we're just like, what are we doing here? But this was before everybody knew you could go virtual for this ish, so it was just like, yeah, we're gonna
Yeah.
rough it. And we had such a great time. It was like one big huge long writer's slumber party. It was incredible. So I'm going to take the helm on this one, just because we were
Yeah,
sitting
go for
around
it.
in our cohort and we had to do our welcome. And I remember it was Mark Sundin, and I think it was, was it Amy Irvine that was in there with him, or was it somebody else? Do you remember who else was in there with him? I know
I
it was a
believe it
female.
was Lydia.
Lydia, thank you. Yes, because they ended up being in that same
Yes.
like writer's box thing with me, and then critiqued my piece together. That's right. Okay. So we're in this big huge group. Everybody's reacquainting with each other because we haven't seen each other since June. We left on a good note. Everybody's added each other on Facebook. Everybody's asking writing prompts in their Facebook feeds. It was awesome. We had a great time. So then we all reconvened in January. First morning in, we're frozen in. We can't go anywhere. Everybody's drinking the coffee. And the conversation turned weird because there's 18 of us. Our prior problem person is now gone. And we're just in there, just vibing. We're having a great time. And Mark asks the question, okay, what is something you would not be comfortable with sharing anywhere else but here? And I had taken those 6 months between summer residency and winter residency, just really researching more about why I felt like I was in this awakening period, the intuition nods that I was getting. I started dreaming like crazy, and those dreams would end up becoming messages for people. I ended up starting to channel a little bit, which was even crazier. And when I look back at it, it's not so crazy. Like the stuff that I've experienced up to this point, like that wasn't crazy. That was just me coming into my own. But I hadn't admitted it out loud to anybody. So there we are going around, and I think I was second to last of 18 people. And you were sitting directly across from me because the tables were in this like weird U shape. And Mark Sundin goes, okay, Dominique. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm in my nonfiction piece. I'm getting my piece workshopped later this week, I think on Wednesday. I'm a mom. I've got 3 kids and I live in Hawaii. And weird fact, I read tarot cards and I am highly intuitive. And it just kind of like plopped out of my mouth. And the gasp that went across the room, I almost cringed because I thought people were like, what the hell did she just admit to? Why would she say that out loud? Like, and when I looked up, the look of awe and invite that was on everybody's like, you did what? What? You're like, do you have cards with you? Like, it was just this incredible acknowledgement and welcome that just seemed to like relax people's shoulders, and they were hunched in and they were like, oh, tell me more, and you produced this little tiny box. And I said, no, I don't have any cards with me. I should have if I was going to make that acknowledgement. And you were like, but I do. And I just remember thinking, like, what is that? And the cards that you produced were this big. Like they were these tiny little tarot Rider Waite deck of tarot cards that you had picked up in Salem. What made you buy them?
Um, so I had started reading tarot when I was in middle school, because my friends and I loved the anime show Escaflowne. This is what started it. It's a
Oh man.
really arbitrary thing, right? And on and off, I read them, and I was raised Roman Catholic, so I had feelings for or against them, through my formative years. And
Mm.
there were times when I was reading them constantly. And there were times when I was like, these are not good for me. I have to get rid of them. So it's always back and forth. So when I was in Salem, I wasn't really leaning full into becoming a witch yet, but I saw this little deck and I thought, well, this is a very small deck. If I decide I don't like it, at least they won't take up a lot of space. And I was buying other things there too, but I was like, I'm going to take this home. And I got home and I start reading with them, and their answers made no sense. No sense.
So
It
you're
was
like,
like, go left, don't go left. So it was like really contradictory responses from them. And I was
right.
like, maybe I need to use the book. So it was still very contradictory. It was very like push and pull. And I was like, I don't think I can use these cards, but they're cute. So I'm not going to throw them out. And plus, they're tiny, so they don't take up a lot of space. So I just kept them. And um, I brought them with another deck to that residency. And I don't know what compelled me to pick them up and put them in my bag. I think I was thinking I'm taking my car, so I have room for these tiny little cards. I don't have to get on a plane or anything. So I just brought them with me, and they were like in my bag, my backpack, and I had forgotten they were in there until that moment when you were like, I don't have any cards. I was like, lucky for you, I have a deck. I don't want these cards.
Clandestine moment right there. Yeah, because it was just
Yeah.
like, oh, you do? You don't. And I always like subscribe to the idea of like tarot readers don't like other tarot readers using their cards. So when you were like, you can have them if you want to use them, I was like, I can have them. And then I was so afraid because like I have my Rider Waite, like I have the ones that are the big, and I'm just like, are they going
You
to
don't go
work? Are they
blind.
just going to
Yeah.
be, and they're so tiny. And I just remember how willing people were to go on that faith journey of, let's go see what Dominique has to say about this. So we had that midnight gathering in the back library, and we ended up at one point having 27 people in there, and they just kept like a round like like what is it, the revolving door. We just had a revolving
Yeah.
door of people, and I think by the end of the night I had done 40 readings for people,
Oh
and I
my
was
goodness.
so exhausted. When I came down the next day, Brenda actually saw me in the stairs. She goes, you look like somebody kicked you in the face.
I can picture her saying that.
And I was like, I yeah, I think I did. And then I had to go into my writer's box that day and
Oh
get
my,
like all of this critique and stuff. But it was one of those things where it's like the universe kicks you in the ass when you need it the most. And
yeah.
because I was in such that weird moment of am I am I in a good place in my marriage, or am I in a bad place? I'm like, I'm not sure where I'm at. But the writing piece I had submitted for this time around was something that Mark had assigned to me, and I ended up turning it into this bigger piece than what he expected. But the feedback I got from this was incredible. And it was supposed to be 10 pages of dialogue, double spaced.
Mhm.
And that's it, just dialogue. Can you tell a story through dialogue? Well, shit, I love to talk, so of course I can. I'll form that however you need me to. So I did this, except when I submitted it, I forgot to double space it, so I didn't see that it was actually 20 pages of dialogue. So I exceeded his request, and I also outed myself because the dialogue that I had chosen to write was a 3-month long continuing argument between my ex-husband and I. And it had started innocently enough of me just asking him on our 18th anniversary, what is it that you love about me? And then it turns into the spiral of, well, I love you for the things that you do. I love that you support everything. I love that. Da, da, da. And it was never a pointed answer of, but I love this about you specifically. So the whole piece is just me trying to, okay, but what about this part about myself? Well, no, that annoys me. Well, what about this part about myself? Well, no, I can't stand when you do that, but I like it when you show up on time, and I like when you take care of the kids on days that I have to work, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, he's not understanding this. And sitting in that writer's box, having 5 women and 4 men hit me with their critique of it. And every single man sitting at that table looked at me and said, you have just created what I think a lot of men have a hard time verbalizing, which is we don't see it. All we hear is a fight. So we try to
Yeah.
avoid the fight by making defense mechanisms come to play instead of just giving you what you want, which is to be seen and to be heard, not for what you do or not what you provide, but who you are as a person. And the minute somebody said that to me, I, in the writer's box, who's supposed to be quiet, started to cry. And I
Oh,
dropped my pen at one point and I was just like, okay, I have to step away from the writer's box for a second because I need to go process for a minute. So they gave me a minute. Danny was in that group with me and she exited with me and helped me calm down. And it was very telling to me at that point. Oh my God, I think my marriage is over. Because if I wrote about that and I couldn't even figure out what it was I was trying to get off my chest, but men saw it and women saw it for what it was, that was everything. So having given this amazing list of readings the night before and then going into a reading of my own was what I needed, because I went home from that residency saying, this is who I am, this is what I do. Either you accept it or I leave or you leave, but either way, we're either going to fix this or we're not. So balls in your court.
right. Yeah.
And the rest is history because he chose not to. So that was 19 years of marriage on a 10-page dialogue experiment. And Mark literally gave me the best compliment by saying this was like reading Hemingway. So, yeah, that was probably my most profound residency out of the 4, just because that was what I needed the universe to do for me, was to just show me unequivocally, this is where you're going. So now you get to make the choice. Where are you going next? But having the next 4 nights ahead of me where I got to utilize that little deck, man, I got really good, like really, really good. And the messages that I gave out to people during that January residency, I heard about in June when we came back. And then I saw you grow into your gifts and grow into your own journey of things. And I could not have been more proud, because all I kept thinking was, she's at the point I should have been like 5 years ago, diving, deep diving into this stuff and really owning it. So watching you pull out runes and watching you pull out additional decks and then talking about the crystals and stuff, I was like, this girl's got it. She's got it.
You totally just flipped a switch for me. It was halfway flipped. It was like the
Mm,
lights were flickering, you know, and you were just like, no, let's just turn that on.
the
All
empath
the
is
way.
not shielding, obviously. That was was
Yeah, but
halfway up.
yeah, yeah, meeting you was such a watershed moment for me. It helped me not only become who I feel I'm meant to be, but um be okay and happy with who I'm meant to be, which is such a gift, you know. So when you think about that compared to writing knowledge is great. And as someone who works with writers, like it's the best, except for when someone actually sees you for who you are
Hmm.
and gives you a foundation to stand on. And that's what you did for me. Without even you didn't come in like trying to sell it. I wasn't necessarily asking for it in a direct way, but it just is where we kind of met.
Right.
And it was such a beautiful thing. It changed my life for the better. So
I think it's one of those things where it's like you meet people who are meant to reflect back to you the things you need to know about yourself. And either those things are
Yeah.
reflected back in a positive way and you make the changes, or you're reflecting to each other, like, hey, this thing about you that I see, own that and do
Yeah.
something with it because it's impossible that you don't see this, but you're looking at me, so you must not. So let me project it back out, you know. So, but same thing though, because I mean, I remember doing those readings that first night with that little deck of cards, and I just remember looking at you at one point going, "Oh my God, these are so great. Like the energy from them are so amazing. Thank you." And I just kept saying thank you to you like over and over again. And when you walked out to go to bed, you were like, "Stop thanking me." And I'm just like, I can't. Like these are incredible. And I didn't expect them to work. So when they did work so well and I was able to get messages out. And no, I wasn't trying to sell it. I think I was trying to sell myself on the idea that I can do this. And this is not impossible to believe that this is something I can do well. And
Yeah.
I didn't, and Danny was, of course, pissed at me because I wouldn't charge anybody for the reading. She was like, "Why aren't you charging? Why aren't you charging anybody?" I'm like, "Because I'm not even sure if I'm really good at this just yet. Like, just wait until, later on down the road, then maybe." But I think when you do something well that comes naturally to you, it makes you feel guilty to
Yeah.
charge for that because then you're feeling like, well, why did I get this gift in the first place if I'm going to charge people for it, And that just makes me feel
Yeah.
gross. And it did for a very long time until Danny, of course, flipped it on its head and she said, "Okay, would you charge somebody for buying one of your books?" I was like, "Yeah, because I worked hard on that book." And she goes, "Okay, would you charge somebody if you had babysat their kids?" "Well, yeah, because I'm working for that money too, because I'm chasing kids." And she was like, "Okay, why are you not charging for your time and your advice that you're giving these people when they come to you willingly? Why are you not charging that?" And I noticed that she never said, "Why are you not charging for your gifts?" It was, "Why are you not charging for your time?" And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh man, that was smart. I see what you did there." She was a very smart lady, so she knew
She,
exactly what to
she
say.
was. And Danny was like very Socratic. She never like as direct as she could be sometimes. If she knew you had to get somewhere, she never just told you it.
Right.
She led you there so that you would discover it yourself. And she had that natural teaching ability in her, you know. Um, and it was such a beautiful thing. But yeah, I'm glad that you charged for your time and effort.
Yeah,
You
'cause
should.
it's not one of those things that I felt comfortable doing, but I think to address the question of who is Danny, who is this woman we keep bringing up. Danny was in our cohort, and at first she was like meeting a beautiful porcupine because you didn't know if you were allowed to get close.
Yeah.
But she had the most amazing curly blonde hair that she would put into these twin French braids that was like really cut short. But when she put them in these twin braids, you could see like or she had shaved underneath, it was incredible. And she had the coolest tattoos on her arms. And I just remember the very first time I met her, I asked her about her tattoo that she had on her, it was like, I think it was her right arm. But it said, "You must come willingly to the blank page." And at first, and I felt like an idiot because I was like, "Well, who said that?" And she just looked at me, she goes, "That would be the Mr. Stephen King, thank you." And I was like, I just pissed off the coolest kid in class. And now I don't, I don't think I'm ever going to make the popular list now. But she just kind of turned and looked at me. She goes, "Why? Why do you ask?" And I said, I love tattoos and I love the story behind tattoos because no one ever just goes into a tattoo shop and say, slap a heart on my, on my ass and not tell you a story about why you're getting a heart on the ass. Like there's a story behind every tattoo. I have tattoos. I have a story for every single one.
Here,
So
here.
I asked her about that. And she goes, "The day I decided to be a writer, I got this tattoo to remind me to always keep writing, even when it gets hard." And the tattoo was a stack of books with the little girl on seated on the stack of books with a little lantern and an open book in her hand. And I just thought, "Oh, this is
Yeah.
so cool." And then she had a whole bunch of other stuff around her and it was amazing. But she ended up becoming like the adopted big sister of everybody in the program. And it didn't matter if you were in our cohort or if you were in a cohort behind us, if you were, she wanted everybody to party and have a good time. And the craziest thing about what she did for a living was that she dealt poker on the World Poker Tour. So she spent time between Texas and Las Vegas, and she did all these incredible shows. And sometimes you could see her on ESPN, dealing out the cards and stuff to these world champions. But she always took it in stride, like, not a big deal. It's just what I do, whatever. And I just always remember looking up to her for her grit and her tenacity. And then I read a
Yeah.
couple of her books that she had published on Amazon, and her traumatic experiences of growing up and still being able to carry herself with that much zest for life was an incredible person to look up to anyway. And she didn't wear it like a badge. She didn't state, this is how I grew up. I had to read her book to find out. So we got all the way through our program. We got very close with another person named Todd. And we were just like the Sunflower Crew is what they called me, Todd and Danny, the Sunflower Posse or something. I think that's what she dubbed us. And about, I want to say 8 months after we graduated, she and I had started to make plans to go visit Italy because she wanted to go for her 50th birthday. I, having lived in Italy, I was like, yeah, let's go. I can take you to all the great places to go in Naples and Rome and all these things. So we started to put plans in place. Then she started to not feel very well. So she had gone on a road trip to visit her sons in another state, and she was driving back and ended up in the ER with a gallbladder attack. At least that's what they thought it was. So she went under surgery. She had her gallbladder removed, only to find out that the surgeon had actually tied off her liver. And within 3 weeks, she was in the hospital. She had sepsis and she passed away very, very suddenly. And luckily, Todd and I got a really good gift out of that, where we actually got to say goodbye, but in a roundabout way. Todd was in Texas, going to AMLE, which was like the writer convention, and he really made it a point to go, not knowing that she was ill and in the hospital when he'd made those plans, but it gave him the opportunity to go to the hospital and see her. So he got to say goodbye. And then she got taken off a ventilator thinking that she had made a turn for the better. And the very second person she called on her list was me. So getting to speak to her, I love you. I'm so sorry that this is happening. I'm so glad that you're talking again. You know, let's make an appointment to call tomorrow or something. And she just, before she got off the phone, she asked if I could do a reading for her. And I couldn't because I was at work. So I said, okay, as soon as I get home, I will get the kids settled and then I will pull some cards for you. Except by the time I got home, she had already been revented because she had made a turn for the worse. And by 1 a.m. that night, she had passed away. So I never got to give her a reading. I never got to pull cards for her. And at the time, I was super angry at the universe. How could you let me speak to her, make her this promise, and then take her away before I could deliver on that process or that promise? And then I realized a year out, after I had put my cards away in protest, and I didn't want to touch my cards because I felt super guilty, that the universe had actually gifted me the ability to say goodbye to her and tell her I loved her without having to do it by way of, can you please tell her, messaging her sister or somebody, could you please tell her I love her? No, I got to tell her directly. And I walked into a psychic shop on New Year's Eve in 2021. And I went to go get a New Year's Day reading. And before I could even speak, before I could even say anything, the psychic burst into tears and said, you have a very strong female presence here with you, and she loves you so much. Why are you not listening? And I was like, who would, and of course, like, I don't know why I didn't instantly go to Danny, being that person, especially because she had been on this journey with me, helping me do tarot readings and pressuring me to make sure I'm charging for my time. Oh, and then she also had me teaching her how to do this stuff. So it was like, of course it would be her. So the message that was given to me was, pick your cards back up, stop feeling sorry for yourself, just like she would have said. And if I have to come out there and kick you in the ass, I will. But you need to go back to doing what you do best, and that's helping people, and that's giving messages that they need to have. So that spurred me off into this whole other thing about, like, well, what does it mean to be able to channel and not channel? And then how come I wasn't able to do those things and get her messages? And it was because I was purposely not paying attention, because I was so wrapped up in my grief about all of it. And her being this fundamental person passing away that had helped me on this journey, like I was so angry. I was stuck in the anger process of grief for the longest time because how dare the universe gift me this person and then take her away. And in the midst of my divorce too, like why would you take her? So it was just like I was angry. I was very angry, but
Yeah.
it was it was one of those lessons that you get from the universe on how to process things appropriately because everything has its own divine timing. And I think I needed that break anyway from my cards because I couldn't be doling out advice to people when I couldn't even get my own shit together. Like within a week, I've filed for divorce, Danny passes away, and then COVID hits and shuts down my job. So
Yeah.
trifecta. And I had a reason to be angry about a lot of stuff, and Danny being the biggest piece of that. But, I wasn't even that angry or upset about my own marriage ending. I was more upset that she got taken out of this world. So, in terms of spirituality and people who put you on this path and then how that like ends up shaking out for you, like she was a huge lesson for me. And she keeps teaching me because now that I've made that connection, it's like, nope, she shows up occasionally. And I know when she's around because I'll get the same exact, what the fuck are you doing?
And you know that's when she's gonna show up because that's when you need her to.
Yeah. The moment I'm letting imposter syndrome set in is the moment I will get this instant thought in my head going, what the fuck are you doing? And I'm like, okay, you got me. You weren't supposed to be here, but you got me. And I think when we start allowing those voices to speak to us and we realize what they really are, it's not intrusive thoughts in a way where it's like they're all bad and evil. Like sometimes you got to face your shadowy shit to work through the good stuff too. So let some of those thoughts fly occasionally. You'd be really surprised in what the path that leads you to is. But yeah, that writing program, I got a degree, but I think I got more connections and understanding who I was more so than anything else.
Yeah. Same.
Best student loan decision ever.
Yes, totally.
Be paying it off on my teacher salary for years, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, right. I hear you. I always call it my first house, my 2 graduate degrees. I'm like, that's my first house.
Okay, so since
Yeah.
graduating though, what have you done with it?
So I trained to become a book coach. And through doing that, that's where I faced a lot of my imposter syndrome. And I ended up publishing a book, a first in a series, and that was so much fun. And I'm working on the next one. Um, and I've also delved more into the spiritual.
But what is it called? What's your book called? What is the series called? What are you writing about? Like tell people what this is so you can like hype it. Come on.
This is the part I'm not so good at yet that I'm working on. So thank you.
Hype it up. Hype it up.
So the series is called Heroes of Sherwood, and it's a Robin Hood retelling from the point of view of an asexual woman set in the medieval era. Um, it the first book is called The Red Fletch, and the second one is called Outlawed, which I'm planning to have released next year. So it's currently in the editing stage. And the Red Fletch is available in ebook, paperback, hardcover on Amazon. And some, the paperback and ebook are exclusive to Amazon. Currently, the hardcover is available some other places. It's in a few libraries as well, local libraries. And it's just so much fun. It really is. I like designing the covers and like writing the book. And I'm not a huge fan of editing my own work, which is strange because when I coach other people, like that's usually when they're, what I'm doing with them is talking them through their story. But for myself, I'm like, I like the drafting process,
Hmm.
the discovery process. But unfortunately, there's more to it than this. um, and I think the reason that I struggle with it is because that's usually when I have to confront imposter syndrome because it never really goes away. It
No.
just back. But it's healthy to keep dealing with it, keep coping with it. And then I thanks to you, I have stepped into working as a tarot practitioner as well. So I do tarot readings, and I have since this summer started to channel a little bit and let those downloads come out. Unfortunately, it means interrupting people sometimes. It's just
Yeah.
like, we'll talk about that in a minute, but I have to say this before I forget. And I always kind of picture you when that happens, because there have been times when you've been giving me readings that you're like, okay, just hang on. I got to tell you this.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, I'm always like, okay, yeah, tell me. But being on the other side of it, it's like you can't keep the words in your mouth. They're gonna fall out, and you're either just gonna talk over the person, they won't hear you, or you have to tell them to just stop talking for a minute so they can hear.
Right.
Uh, so that's been really interesting. And yeah, so it's been a very creative and spiritual journey since then.
More, yeah, that's hmm, how to put that into just like a little summary analysis of everything. It's
Nugget.
very difficult. It's very difficult. But
It
you
is.
also have a podcast that you're starting.
I do. My friend Victoria and I are starting a podcast called This Magical Life. And the whole premise of it is to help show people that magic and intuition are gifts that everybody can have. And it's great to have a beautiful altar and wonderful crystals and all this other stuff, but if you don't have it, it's not a problem. That magic happens in your mind and in your heart, and using those two things together to kind of like create it. There's so much going on I'm a reluctant user of TikTok, and I see a lot of people posting on there about witchcraft because I follow Witch Talk because I
Hmm.
post into it as well. And some of the things I see are fabulous, but others are like, if you're not doing your witchcraft this way, you're doing it wrong and you're going to curse yourself. And like, we want to just make it okay for people to do it their way, like it's all fine. You're not going to, if your intention is pure, you're not going to break yourself.
Right.
So that's kind of our underlying point, but hopefully we'll deliver it with a little bit of laughter as well.
So that's the thing. If you can't take a joke and you can't take things with a grain of salt sometimes, especially in the spiritually minded community, I think sometimes people get so high up on their horse about the way things are supposed to be done. And I always laugh because at the beginning of every single month, there is this tsunami of posts about how you're supposed to take cinnamon and salt, and if you're not salting your door, and if you're not blowing cinnamon in saying I welcome abundance into this house for everyone involved, it's like you're doing it wrong. But like,
Yeah.
where did it start in the beginning anyway? Like you can't believe that a Celtic witch from the 1300s just decided abundance must come into this abode the way that I see fit, and poof, here's your cinnamon. Because think about the ingredients that were widely available and how sometimes the spice trade didn't make it up your way. Like, what did you use? You probably used whatever was in your wheelhouse at that time, and that was whatever's growing at your front door or whatever you had available at the market. And I think that also going back to what you were saying about your book, about how it's this asexual character in medieval England, and
England, yeah,
in the time of
to start.
Robin Hood, first of all, let's talk about the fact that we don't have any non-binary asexual characters whenever it comes to historical fiction or historical nonfiction, because nobody was represented and there was no
Right.
voice for non-binary or asexual. They just were the odd ones out. And
Yeah.
I think it's incredible that you chose to write a character with those characteristics and that, identity, because we don't ever really hear about that. So
Thank
when you
you.
were doing the research and stuff, like did you come across anything in the historical research that said like these are the way people were represented, or was there any representation, or was there just like burn them at the stake kind of ideas?
I think a lot of them were forced into lives that they didn't really want. They were forced to marry. If they were wealthy, they might be forced to take the veil. Um, and there weren't so many options for women at the time that my story takes place. Once the Black Death comes through and wipes out half the population, there were more opportunities for women because women had to work because there was no one else to do it. There weren't
Hmm.
enough people. So, but this takes place before that by a couple hundred years. So, you know, my protagonist has more options than many because she does have some connections to the noble class, but she still doesn't have a lot. And she faces, you know, onslaughts from people who are like, you should be married by now. Why aren't you
Right.
married? And it comes up again and again and again. And there are times throughout the entire series when she's like, life would just be easier if I went to a convent, but she doesn't want to because it's not what she's called to do. Um, one of the things that I find so fascinating about the medieval world is how readily it seems, and I say this with a grain of salt because history was written by the people who could read and write, and
Mm-hmm.
most people in my protagonist class could do neither. So they really didn't have a voice, for the most part. But there were the nobles, there were the clergy, and then there was everybody else who did all the grunt work. So, to even imagine of doing something outside of your class's expectations, I think it's a little more common than we think it was, but it would still have been worthy of ostracizing someone.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of playing with the notion of being an outlaw for a reason that is not attached to her asexuality, yet she still has these other, she's an outlaw because of the things she's doing. um, she would have been just as ostracized if she were open about the fact that she was not interested in a romantic relationship. She's asexual and aromantic. Um, and she kind of grew into that. The first draft, she was not that way. She wasn't really interested in finding a husband, but it wasn't, it had nothing to do with her identity. So it kind of happened over a few drafts where it was like, oh no, this is why
Mm-hmm.
this is why she's so disinterested in this path. um and some of that I'm sure I pulled from myself. I'm asexual, I'm not aromantic like Alice is, but um there's definitely a little bit of all of ourselves that we give to our characters every time we write them, or anyone in a story. We're pulling from our own experience, so um but yeah, I didn't find a lot in research about people who were identified that way. Definitely there were people who were identified as sodomites, was the word that they
Mm-hmm.
used,
Yeah.
or homosexual man. um and that was very frowned upon. There were times in history when there was a lot of violence in that quarter. Basically anybody who was different could be victimized and have a violent reaction from everybody else. There was a lot of fear of the other. I mean, I know that Beowulf doesn't take place in England, but it is written there, and the idea of there being this monstrous other, you know, don't go into the mist
Mm-hmm.
because horrible things will happen to you there. This like unknown, this fear of the unknown, um, was really pervasive. And that's I think that's what I've seen more than like, here's this identity group that we didn't have a word for yet. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the closest thing to it, as to asexuality, as far as a comparison that there might have been a word for, would be someone who's a hermaphrodite, which is a totally different thing.
Right.
But to the medieval mind, it would have garnered the same amount of fear and therefore disrespect. So really, for Alice, that's not something she vocalizes very much, because A, she doesn't have the language for it because the word didn't exist. And B, if it, even when it did start to exist, asexuality in particular, which wasn't really talked about until hundreds of years after Alice would be dead, um, it was used more in a biological sense. And then after that, when they started assigning the identity to people, it was thought that they could be cured of it by forcing them to have sex with somebody.
Right. Because obviously, if the church gets involved, then it's a question of, well, they just need to be married off and have children so they can get their mind right again and get right with
Yeah.
God. But, it's funny when you were talking earlier about like how this dark other, thing that they're fighting against. If you take a look at ancient civilizations and the religions that they have, they always mention the dark, right? Like there's that unknown. And a lot of indigenous and ancient cultures talk about going willingly into that dark to face things and then come out the other side and you're enlightened and you have all this, the ability to connect with the earth and connect to other people. And it's very funny, not so funny, how we've got this big uh all-encompassing idea of religion that has spurned up in the aftermath of the fall of Rome, let's just put it that way, and how the ideas were twisted to
Mm-hmm.
not allow for the dark to be something good. It was made to be something to be feared and to have
Yeah.
an evil label put on it So that way, anybody who fell into that dark sphere of existence of not aligning with whatever the church was stating that they needed to do or how they needed to live, that they were in that dark place that could then be labeled as evil. And
Yeah.
I love the fact that you have a character that does not have a they don't have like a gendered identity where they're like the damsel in distress and oh well if they're a female and they're of marrying age they need to be rescued, and it almost seems like Alice has this identity of if you took my gender out of this and you just allowed me to be, I could be the hero of this story and other people's stories and there would be no question as to whether I deserve it or not. So I
Yeah.
love that. I love that it's approached in that way because had we taken all of these other characters and applied it that way versus female or male, why can't they just be the hero versus the heroine or the hero, in a male gender term? But when you take it as this, there is no term for this. So I am just me. I am just I, and being able to be a hero, it takes on this exceptional quality, and I wish we had more of that type of representation versus just this idea of Disney princess that needs to be rescued, damsel in distress, the witcher, and then all of these different types of very broody male heroes that get a soft spot from us. But really, if you were to take gender out of it, the story would be so much more. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to have a
I agree.
romanticized ideal to it.
I agree 100%. Thank you for saying that. And yeah, it's something that's of deep interest to me, how we identify and the labels that we even claim ourselves. Obviously we have the term asexual now and it's used to describe someone's um identification, and people can claim it for themselves or not claim it for themselves. And so things have certainly changed. We've progressed since Alice's fictional existence. But at the same time, there's still a lot of fear around it, and a lot of people don't understand, you
Right.
know.
A lot of people would rather you go back into that dark space and just be
Yeah,
labeled as evil versus let me learn so that I can unlearn this ignorance from which I am approaching this to label it
yeah,
as evil. That
yeah.
needs to get done and go away.
I agree. And I think we're going to see in literature, both fiction and nonfiction in the coming decades, more growth of representation and a broader view of what it means to be a hero. Um,
Do you think even with
that is my
the additional literature that will come out that will be written from these perspectives, do you think the backlash and the push for banning these types of literature will also increase?
yes, because there's always going to be people who are afraid of it,
Mm-hmm.
and their numbers haven't dwindled much in 1,000 years. So why would it start all of a sudden? I think it takes time. Progress takes decades, centuries, even. I think there are certainly watershed moments in history where things take a leap forward,
Oh
but then
yeah.
they often leap back, right? Like I, I, I was talking about this with somebody the other day, and I said, as someone who identifies as a witch, we're currently enjoying a time when that's generally more accepted, but now there's starting to be some pushback from
Mm-hmm.
certain communities who are afraid, right?
But who is it being labeled as evil and a reason to be afraid, though? It's usually from white cis men at the head of these pulpits that subscribe to the idea that fear mongering is the way to change people's hearts and minds.
Yes.
When the witch community has only ever wanted to outreach and show that you can grow your own herbs, you can heal your own bodies, you can cook your way to a healthy existence, but these pulpits just keep pulling more people in through fear versus what we know to be natural and loving, which wasn't
Yeah,
that Jesus's message in the beginning anyway? Like, not
it
once,
was.
not once did he come out and condemn anybody. He
Right.
literally went and got in front of a group who were about to stone a prostitute to death. He went
Yeah.
in with the lepers and touched on them and said, my touch will heal you, and convinced other people to help come in and help heal. Like, he did not condemn one single person, not even the people who were persecuting him. So when you got all these people standing up on this pulpit saying, we're gonna crucify you, you witch, you know exactly who I'm talking about, but it's,
I
you know,
do.
it's this fear-mongering type of approach using this person who came to earth as a teacher to guide us and has misaligned the message to feed into this bigger agenda of the way things need to be controlled and labeled and eviled, right?
Yeah.
So that's where it's, yes, I completely agree. I think we go through these watershed moments, but having been a huge nerd in history and learning all of this, you know, and getting my degree and what and seeing the cyclical moments that happen in history, and it seems to be on this 100-year cycle where we have moments where we push forward and we progress. Everything is great for a little while, and then there's this giant clap back that pushes us 20 steps back versus the 10 that we just took forward. And if you look at the passing of Roe versus Wade in the 80s when that first or 70s, 80, of course, like my history brain just took a bleh. Anyway, whenever that happened, women's rights took a huge leap forward. Women were able to enter the workforce. Then you could start suing people for sexually harassing you at work and getting justice for it. People were pushing back against sexual predators. People were pushing back against all of these other things. Then go back a little further. You had the 1960s, you had the civil rights movement happen. And then you had this huge rise in race riots where people were just simply saying, can we exist? Are we allowed to do that? Can we do that and also have a voice in our government from which under which we are ruled? Can we have a voice in that? And then having this giant pushback in the South, and then segregation is coming to an end, but not so fast. You know, like we're
Yeah.
we're still gonna have armed guards and mass amounts of white people yelling at a 6-year-old because that's how we do things. Ruby Bridges. That's we don't progress. So I would hope that this watershed moment we've had of all of this hate and divisiveness and just vitriol that seems to be coming out to divide us will end up being this beautiful moment of learning and understanding where people are tired of the fear mongering and tired of the pulpits going, that's not how I want to live the rest of my life, feeling anxious and angry all the time. I would rather go join the witch circle that's out in nature, picking marigolds and learning how to make calendula tea. That's,
Right?
I would rather do that.
I mean, so would I. So would I. So, that is what I do. Because it just seems like more fun. Yeah, and I I was an art history major in undergrad, and we studied a lot of the history of Catholicism because we were studying a lot of Western art,
Mhm.
and that's who dictated what Western art got to be, in large part. So
We'll go to any
yeah,
museum in Europe, and the whole entire wing of the museum is Catholic art, Christian art,
yeah,
and they were the ones who were documenting things that were going on at the time. But there will always be Jesus looking over everybody.
yeah. Well, so I remember I was in my senior year, and the church finally released the Gospel according to Judas, which had
Mm,
been suppressed since like shortly after Jesus's death, like in the year
right.
150, right? I don't remember which council it was. Might have been the Council of Trent that like kicked out most of the Gospels. I don't remember. I used to know this thing. I don't anymore. But I read the Gospel according to Judas, and a lot of what he says about Jesus's teachings, they sound a lot like Hinduism. They sound a lot like other forms of paganism. They sound a lot like New Age spirituality,
Oh yeah.
and it was so interesting to me, um, because especially for a religion that borrowed so heavily from other spiritual practices, it was so interesting to. I mean, I understand why they didn't accept Judas's gospel because they wanted to make him, you know, the bad guy of the narrative.
He's the
But
reason. Yeah, he's the reason.
yeah, but it was so fascinating. And, I would encourage anyone to read it, regardless of what your belief system is, because it really just shows how much broader the story was. And it also fills in some of those gaps of like what happened to Jesus from when he was like prepubescent to 33 years old.
Right. Yeah, he didn't just appear on Earth, from the virgin birth as a 33-year-old man willing to
I mean,
talk
I hope not
about,
for Mary's sake.
right? That would be a horrible, horrible virgin birth. But whatever supernatural stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Who knows? But it's just it's really interesting to me the difference between what people claim to follow versus what is said in order to keep that fear going, you
Right.
know?
Well, it's
Yeah.
also like I said earlier about the traditionalist idea of it's the first of the month, everybody should be salting and
Yes.
cinnamoning their because we said so. But where did it start? And I think if we go back into all doctrine, regardless of from which system of thought this comes from or belief system, whatever, there's always the originating things, and like what's been allowed to be left in, what's been taken out. And and it's funny you mentioned TikTok because I learn a lot from TikTok, and I'm usually on like historian TikTok, teacher TikTok, and lately it's been a lot of witch talk and stuff because I've been posting more things like that. But somebody had gone into a thrift store in rural Georgia and found a Bible from 1938, and
Wow.
the Bible did not mention anything about gay being illegal, like not illegal, but like sinful. Being gay is sinful. Like there was none of that. But in the 1950s, with the rise of McCarthyism, all of a sudden, the Bibles are now reflecting this idea that being, homosexual is this big and horrible infraction upon the world, and you can't be gay. And all of these things just came out. And it was just like, well, hold on. How did you reinterpret that from the 1930s to the 1950s when political ideologies are starting to come out against communists? And if you're gay, you must be a communist. Oh,
Yeah. But
man.
only if you're male.
Only if you're male. Yeah.
If you're a lesbian, it's fine.
No, we don't want to
Well,
talk
not
about,
fine, but yeah.
which it just begs the question as to within spirituality circles, you also have these divisive concepts
Yes.
of, because even on Witch Talk on TikTok, you see these people coming for, oh, I saw her and I knew she was a fraud the minute she came on my For You page. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, why were you sitting there watching this person if you knew they were a fraud? Like, you were
It's
a fan.
so fast.
Don't be upset. You knew you were a fan from the beginning. You're just mad because she didn't subscribe to the same type of witchery you subscribe to, or she conned people out of money, which is horrible. But I mean, come on, come on.
Yeah.
Spirituality has been the game changer for taking people for their money. That's one of those, which is why one of the biggest issues I had with doing readings for money in the first place was a big no-no for me. So switching it to charge for your time, not your gifts. Well, that makes more sense. But and if the church did that, that would be a total game changer, because if you go to church to pray for forgiveness or pray for all of these things and you're only allowed in from the hours of 10 to 12 on a Sunday, but you're still required to give 10% of your annual income, that's a lot. And I don't think I'm getting my return from my investment, but thank you. This was fun. So in terms of, the way that spirituality can be tweaked, adjusted, I think in all things, believe what you want to believe, adhere to whatever doctrine you want to adhere to, as long as it does harm to nobody except you and
Yep.
yourself and your own feelings. But don't try to ram it down other people's throats that the way you pray is the way everybody should pray.
Please don't.
No. And I think that also takes me back to the MFA program too, because I was so afraid to come out and say who I was, what I did, what I was proud of myself doing. And then to get that acceptance, I was like, oh, okay, so this isn't as weird as I thought it was. But then having conversations around that circle with people later on throughout, the hotel and in the lobby and stuff, and people were taking me aside and saying, okay, well, what is it that you believe if you do this thing? And I remember one of the people from another cohort stopped me and said, I saw you doing readings, and I saw that you were doing a reading for somebody, and you weren't even using your cards, you were just holding her hands across the table, and you were like in her face about some stuff. And I kind of looked at her. I was like, hold on, was I in her face or was I giving her a message? And she goes, well, that's what I mean. You were just like all up in her spiritual self, and you were telling her some stuff, and she was crying, and you were just dead set on delivering this thing. And I was like, okay, so what's your question though? Like, now I feel awkward that you were watching me, and now I'm like, did I have a face? Like, what was my face? But the the way that she was just like, no, I think my question is, what do you think happens if you were able to deliver this message from her passed over person? Where do you think we go? And I remember being taken aback by that question because I had never really thought about it. Even though I was
Yeah.
delivering messages, I never really thought about it. I knew people came to me when they needed to deliver a message, and I only ever delivered messages that I knew would be helpful and that would alleviate some suffering. I've never had a spirit come to me and say, I need you to go fuck somebody's shit up. Like, I've never had somebody do that. But that really did make me pause. And I think that was the difference between when I left residency that time to when I came back that next summer, because that next summer I was on fire. I was ready. I had
You
the answer
were.
to that. And I was still trying to figure it all out. Cause, I think in order to say one way or the other where we go after we pass away, that's not an easy answer, because there are multiple planes in which you could go. And I think it's a choice based on what your soul is needing and what next ascension is going to happen for your soul. Because if you subscribe to the idea of karma and dharma, everybody has a lesson to learn, and
Mm.
everybody is somebody else's lesson in this life. And sometimes you have those people in your framework of existence that you just can't seem to shake, even though they might be toxic or bad, or you just feel bad every time they're around, but you're still attracted to them in some way. And they could be a family member, they could be somebody that you met in high school, they could be somebody you met in kindergarten. You just can't shake this person. And honestly, I look at those people as karmic lessons, because there's something about them you were meant to learn. And until you learn it, they're attached. They are attached to you. So whether we are good lessons or bad lessons for people, I think if we are willing to do the work to get through those lessons and then ascend to the next thing, we're on our path. We're where we are needing to go. However, if we avoid it and we label everything as dark and mysterious and scary and sinful, and we don't hit those things head on and say, okay, this is the lesson I need to learn, and I need to process it and work through it, and then understand why this was sent to me as a lesson, we get held back, and then we get stuck here repeating patterns until we actually figure it out. And that might actually
Yeah.
stunt our soul a little bit. So I think that's why when that question was asked of me, I had no answer, because even I'm in my head going, all right, next spirit who comes across, I'm going to ask that question. And when I tried to ask that question, I got shut down very quickly. I'm not here to answer your spiritual questions. I'm here to finish up this business I have with this person.
You're not meant to know right now.
Exactly. And I was very frustrated. I was like, that's not, I'm the one delivering your message. Like, how dare you, sir? How dare you? But at the same time, he was like, it'll come in time. Just I'm not here to deliver this for you. You are this vessel in which I need to help me channel this thing so I can get this message out. And then the next person I would ask that question, okay, what happens when this is all said and done and we are no longer a spiritual being having a human existence? Like, what happens after that? And this next spirit was very positive and very patient with me and said, if you think about it, we are all different levels of spirit. Those who are easily able to come through, we have a little bit more stuff on earth that we need to work through and we need to get, off of our off of our spiritual chests. And then there are those who are a little bit more higher ascended, and they are either on their next journey or they are waiting for the rest of their karmic people to join them so that they can go on to the next journey. And those will be the ones that are able to be pulled in to communicate. And then those that sometimes mediums have a really hard time contacting or cannot channel at all, it's because they're already past to that next level where they're
Yeah.
unreachable. So learning at it from that perspective, I was just like, okay, that makes way more sense. And that means that the journey never ends. And that's even really more exciting,
Yeah,
because
right? Like,
how
there's more.
amazing. Exactly. So it's like, also going back to that conversation you said we had, where it's like, okay, we were probably really good friends in another life, or we were like related, or
Thank you for
but
joining me on this
regardless of
latest
all that
episode
past
of
stuff,
Have
like
We
we're
Really
friends
Met?
for life in this
Join
one,
me next
because
time when I will be interviewing more people
because
from my
those are
past
the things.
and my
It's like
social media lists.
you don't know what
So
you
until
know
next
about
time,
somebody until
I'm
you know.
Dominique, and this is
And
the
Yeah.
Have We Really Met
I think
podcast.
as well, like I had totally blanked on our first meeting being me telling you you're an empath and needs to shield. Yuck, yuck. Like I didn't know. I didn't remember. I thought our first meeting was at dinner, but that also could have been me going, okay, what was on the menu for tonight? Did anybody see the menu? Anybody? Wait, did I talk to you? I talked to you? What did I say?